Ask a Jamaican about some of these places and watch them go quiet, not because the history is lost, but because they were taught not to speak it. Duppies you do not name, great houses where the ground remembers, whole towns the record was allowed to forget. You have driven past most of them, never knowing what is buried under your feet. Here are 13. Number 13, the village planted as a weapon, Seaford Town, Westmoreland. Deep in the Montpelier Mountains sits a place locals still call Germantown. It was founded in 1835 by Charles Ellis, the first Baron Seaford, and the reason it exists is one people rarely say out loud. Slavery was ending. The planters, badly outnumbered and shaken by the 1831 rebellion, were terrified the newly freed would take the island's interior. So the colonial government ran a scheme to seed armed European settlers through the hills as a human buffer. The first group had arrived from Bremen in 1834. Then around 249 Germans from Westphalia sailed in on a ship called the Olbers and were dropped on roughly 500 acres carved from the Montpelier estate. They were promised cottages and support. They found neither. Many died within weeks of disease and hunger. And by 1838, well over 1,000 Germans had been imported island-wide. Their descendants are still there, with German surnames and pale eyes, a few German words still folded into the local speech. A whole community was planted to hold the line against other people's freedom. That silence is the first kind on this list. The next is written into a ruin most Jamaicans drive straight past. Number 12. The cathedral that made rum, Kenilworth, Hanover, a few miles from Lusail, stands some of the finest industrial ruins in the Caribbean, so grand that visitors say they look less like a factory than a ruined English abbey. This was once the Magady Estate, named for the river running through it, and it first appears in the crop accounts of 1757 under the owner John Blagrove, with an overseer named Lachlan Shaw. That year it turned out 132 hogsheads of sugar, 43 puncheons of rum, and 50 casks of molasses. By 1819, the output was collapsing. Somewhere before 1882, the name changed to Kenilworth, and the record gives no reason why. What remains is a cut stone boiling house and distillery, a 2-story limestone building with a curved stair to an arched doorway, a great cast iron water wheel that somehow still turns, and a small burial ground with a slab to Thomas Blagrove, dead in 1755 at just 22, leaving a widow and 1 child. All that beauty was built in the days when sugar was king, and cut by people whose names were never written down. Today, it is the quiet grounds of a training school. From a ruin hiding in plain sight, we move to a place a whole university was built on top of. Number 11, the camp under the campus, Gibraltar Camp, Mona. If you have walked the University of the West Indies at Mona, you have walked a wartime camp. In 1940, Britain built it on 252 acres of the old Mona Sugar Estate, first for around 1,500 civilian evacuees from Gibraltar, mostly women, children, and the elderly. Later came Jewish refugees stranded in Spain and Portugal, and in turn Germans and Italians branded enemy aliens. There were wooden barracks, a hospital, a police station, and a store. And there was even a chapel built partly from the stones of an old abandoned mansion. At least 3 people died inside the camp. The Jewish congregation's records still carry the names. When the war ended, the barracks became the first buildings of the university, which took its first 33 students in 1948. Students crossed that ground every day, past the surviving huts and the broken aqueduct, never told that beneath the lecture halls lie the ruined sugar works of the Mona and Papine estates and the graves of the enslaved who ran them. 2 histories, stacked and neither one taught. From a camp built over a plantation, we move to a castle whose own story was simply deleted. Number 10, the ruin with no record, Colbeck Castle, St. Catherine. 2 miles north of Old Harbor stands the largest ruin of its kind in Jamaica, roughly 114 feet by 90, with a tower at each corner, brick ovens in the outbuildings, and the remains of a moat. It is attributed to Colonel John Colbeck, who came with the English invasion of 1655, was granted 1,340 acres, sat as Speaker of the House, and died in 1682, leaving no heir. And that is nearly everything anyone can prove. There are no drawings, no paintings, no account of who finished it or why a structure built in the style of a 17th century Italian villa was raised at all. It is not even mentioned by the name Colbeck Castle until an 1896 advertisement. English writers who saw it in the 1890s could not understand how something so grand had gone completely unrecorded. It was declared a national monument in 1990, and it is still, in the words of one historian, an architectural whodunit, a puzzle asking who built it and when, a building you cannot miss, and a record that simply left it out. From a ruin with no story, we go to a fortress the earth itself pulled down. Number 9, the fortress the fever emptied. Stokes Hall, St. Thomas. In the far southeast, above the Plantain Garden River, stand the ruins of one of the oldest English structures on the island. The land was seized in 1656 by Luke Stokes, a former governor of Nevis, who drove out the last Spanish here and renamed the place after himself. He brought around 1,600 settlers to farm the fertile delta, and within a couple of years, the delta killed most of them. Malaria and yellow fever took Stokes himself, his wife, and 2/3 of his people. The survivors climbed to higher ground, and there the enslaved Africans he had shipped from Nevis built the Great House, which the old records name plainly as the Stokes Hall Slave House. Like the others, it was a fortress, its walls cut through with gun holes, the road up lined with the huts of the enslaved. An earthquake finally brought the house down in 1907, and the ruins have stood open ever since, among the oldest foundations in the country, on ground that swallowed the men who claimed it almost as fast as they arrived. From a house the fever emptied, we go to a waterfall named for a man who tried to burn the whole system down. Number 8, the falls that hide a mass grave. Tacky Falls, St. Mary. Deep in the bush at Islington hides one of the island's most inaccessible waterfalls, and it carries the name of Tacky, a Fonte royal from Ghana who was enslaved and made an overseer on the frontier estate near Port Maria. Before dawn on Easter Monday, the 7th of April, 1760, he and his men rose, took the frontier and Trinity estates, and raided the armory at Fort Haldane, carrying off 4 barrels of gunpowder and 40 firearms. Hundreds joined him. Obeah men moved through the camp, handing out a powder they swore would turn British bullets aside, and for a moment it looked like the first black nation in the Caribbean. Then one man slipped away and warned the militia. The Maroons were sent under treaty to hunt their own, and Tacky was run down and killed. The last of his followers were found in a cave near these falls, having taken their own lives rather than be dragged back into the chain, and that cave has never been found. People know the story and still say the man's name carefully. From a people who chose death over the collar, we go to the first colony, raised over a people erased before them. Number 7, the town built on a buried people. Seville, St. Anne. Near St. Anne's Bay lies Sevilla la Nueva, New Seville, founded in 1509 by Juan de Esquivel with 80 settlers, after Jamaica was handed to the Columbus family in 1508. It was the first European town in Jamaica and the island's first capital, and it was set down directly on a Taino village called Maima that had stood since around the year 650. When the Spanish found no gold, they turned the island into a supply farm. They built the first sugar mill in all of the Americas here in 1517 and landed the first enslaved Africans as early as 1513. Then, in 1534, they abandoned the capital for Spanish Town, and the last stubborn residents who stayed behind were killed when French corsairs attacked in 1554. Dig at Seville and you dig through layers. The Spanish over the Taino they erased, the English over the Spanish, with the ruins of a governor's castle, a Spanish church, and a water wheel still on the ground. It is called the birthplace of modern Jamaica. It is also a graveyard of the people who were here first. From a town built over the dead, we move to a cliff where 2 people chose the drop. Number 6, the cliff 2 lovers chose. Lover's Leap, St. Elizabeth. At Yardley Chase near Southfield, the Santa Cruz Mountains end in a straight 1,700-foot drop to Cutlass Bay, so high that the country later put the highest lighthouse in the Western Hemisphere on the edge of it. The pretty overlook sells romance now, But the story underneath is a killing. In the 1700s, two enslaved people, remembered as Mizzy and Tunky, loved each other on an estate whose owner, Richard Chardley, wanted Mizzy for himself. He arranged to have Tunky sold away. The pair ran rather than be parted, were chased to the edge of this cliff, and went over it together. The estate was a coffee and cotton plantation of some 1,500 acres, worked by around 80 enslaved people. And even the name of the place, Yardley, is a worn-down version of Chardley, the man they were fleeing. The site was made a protected National Heritage Site in 2002, and wooden carvings of the two now stand where they jumped. A love story, people say. It was two people choosing death over a master. From a place people romanticize, we go to a place they will not name at all. Number 5. The church the dead emptied. Duppies Church, Manchester. Just outside Mile Gully stands the abandoned St. George's Anglican Church, though nobody local calls it that. They call it Duppies Church. The story is that the congregation gave it up after Duppies tormented them so badly that worship became impossible. The doors are gone, the pews are gone, the windows are broken out, and the ruin is ringed by graves whose stones go back to the 1800s. Taxi men in the district tell of stopping at night for a young woman near the church who is not there when they turn around. People passing report faint organ music drifting from a building with no organ and no roof. Whatever you believe, the behavior is real and consistent. Most people in that community will not go near it after dark, and they do not like to say its name out loud. This is the exact silence this whole list is built around, a place a whole district has quietly agreed to leave alone. From a church the dead cleared out, we go to a town the army tried to wipe from the map. Number 4. The stronghold the record tried to erase. Nanny Town, Blue Mountains. High in the Stony River Valley, on the wild border of Portland and St. Thomas, stood the fortress of the Windward Maroons, called in the old colonial papers only the Great Negro Town. It was led by Queen Nanny, today one of Jamaica's national heroes, and in her own time, an Ashanti-born Obeah woman, said to have worked protection over her fighters so they could not be beaten. She taught them to cover themselves in leaves and branches and ambush the redcoats like moving trees. The town was built around 1723. The British did not even find it until 1728, and then they came again and again. In 1730, 1731, 1732, and at last, in 1734, they destroyed it and claimed to have killed everyone in it. The survivors slipped away and refounded it Moortown in 1740. For generations, the original site was simply lost in the bush, and to the Maroons, the ground is sacred, not a place you walk onto lightly. A whole free town, attacked until it vanished, then left off the map. From a town the record tried to erase, we go to a man the record could not. Number 3. The Killer's Tower, Edinburgh Castle, St. Anne. In the remote Pedro district stand the ruins of a 2-story stone house with 2 round, loopholed towers set at opposite corners. It was built around 1770 by Lewis Hutchinson, born in Scotland in 1733, and remembered as Jamaica's earliest recorded serial killer. He ran cattle on the estate and was accused of stealing his neighbor's strays, but that was the smallest of it. For miles, this was the only house on the road from St. Anne's Bay. So travelers stopped to rest, and he shot them from the towers or invited them inside and killed them there. The bodies went into a sinkhole now called Hutchinson's Hole, 98 meters, more than 300 feet, straight down. The enslaved who told the truth were dismissed as liars, and the neighbors were too frightened to go near the place until he shot a soldier sent to arrest him. When he was finally taken and hanged in Spanish Town in 1773, searchers found 43 watches that were not his. The historian Olive Sr. records that he went to the gallows without remorse, left 100 pounds in gold to build his own monument, and wrote his own defiant epitaph. From one man's tower of quiet murder, we go to a whole city the sea took in a morning. Number 2. The city the sea swallowed, Port Royal, Kingston Harbor. On the floor of the harbor lies what was once called the wickedest city in the world and the Sodom of the universe. the richest pirate port in the Americas. Built out over loose sand with brick houses 3 and 4 stories tall. At 43 minutes past 11 on the morning of the 7th of June, 1692, an earthquake of around magnitude 7.5 struck. The sand turned to liquid. The streets rolled like waves and swallowed people whole, squeezing some to death with their heads left above the ground. And a tsunami finished what the shaking began. 33 acres slid beneath the water in minutes, and 4 of the town's 5 forts were destroyed or submerged. About 2,000 died at once, and some 3,000 more in the days that followed from injury and disease. The graveyard split open, and the dead floated through the streets. Much of the town still lies under 20 to 40 feet of water, untouched for nearly 3 centuries and only partly surveyed even now. And the grave of Henry Morgan himself went into the sea with it. Many at the time called it the judgment of God. From a city people said God had judged, we come at last to the house a curse was said to follow. Number 1, the house no one could keep. Rose Hall, St. James. Above Montego Bay stands the great house built in 1770 for John Palmer, then Custos of St. James. It was a calendar house, 365 windows, 52 doors, 12 bedrooms, over a plantation that once held around 2,000 enslaved people, and it is still called one of the most haunted houses in the Western Hemisphere. The legend is Annie Palmer, the White Witch, said to have murdered 3 husbands and enslaved lovers, to have set bear traps for runaways and thrown the injured into a dungeon below. The documented history is colder and thinner. Much of the tale comes from a 1929 novel by Herbert de Lisser, and the real mistress died in obscurity, not in blood. Johnny Cash, who owned a great house nearby, later put the legend into a song, but 2 things are not in doubt. The enslaved feared that house so deeply that after the mistress died, they burned her belongings, and no owner could hold it afterward. It stood abandoned for more than 125 years before it was finally restored in the 1960s. Whatever the truth of Annie, the fear was real, and the cruelty that fear grew out of was real. That is why, of all 13, this is the one the island could never quite bury. 13 places, one island that keeps its dead close. Subscribe, and we keep uncovering what people will not say.